I don't know how to explain this in a way that makes sense. Honestly, I'm not sure it makes sense even to me, and I lived through it. But you asked, so here it is. It started as a vacation, an escape. Emily and I had been having a tough year, so we decided to get away from it all. We chose this remote island resort in the Pacific, in the middle of nowhere, because it seemed perfect. The brochure promised quiet beaches, luxurious cabins, and complete privacy. It sounded like paradise. At first it was. The island was beautiful, clear blue water, soft white sand, and lush greenery. The staff was attentive but scarce, leaving us to feel like we had the place all to ourselves. And then we met him. His name was Nico. He said he was a local, born and raised on the island. He seemed friendly enough, always smiling, always curious. At first, it was charming. He asked how we liked the island, and what we'd done so far, and even gave us tips on the best spots to watch the sunset. But something about him was off. He showed up everywhere. If we went to the beach, Nico was there, sitting just close enough to strike up a conversation. At dinner, he'd wave from a nearby table. If we went for a walk, we'd bump into him along the path. Emily brushed it off, saying he was just being friendly, but it made my skin crawl. The way he looked at us, like he was studying us, wasn't right. The first night we noticed something strange. We thought it was nothing. A pair of Emily's sandals went missing from the porch. We laughed it off, thinking the wind must have blown them away. But then it was my watch, and Emily's sunglasses. Small things, but they started adding up. At night, the noises started. It wasn't the normal sounds you'd expect, wind rustling through the trees or waves crashing on the shore. These were different. Scratching. Soft footsteps just outside the cabin. Once, I heard what sounded like someone whispering, but when I opened the door, no one was there. The resort staff insisted the island was safe, but they didn't seem to care much. They just smiled, nodded, and said, "It's probably just the wind." One afternoon, we decided to explore the island. Emily loves taking photos, so she brought her camera along. We found an overgrown path that led to a small clearing with an incredible view of the ocean. Emily was snapping pictures when Nico appeared out of nowhere. "You found the old trail," he said, smiling wide. "Not many guests come this way." His sudden appearance startled us, but we tried to act normal. He talked about the island's history and how his family had lived there for generations. The whole time, I felt his eyes on us, lingering too long. That night, Emily wanted to go through the photos she'd taken. As she scrolled through them, she suddenly went pale. "John," she whispered, "look at this." The photos were normal at first. Trees, flowers, the ocean. But then we saw it. In the background of one shot, half hidden behind the trees, was a figure. It was blurry, but it looked like a person. I tried to convince her it was nothing. "Probably just another guest," I said. But the truth is, the sight of it made my stomach twist. The next morning, things got worse. Our phones had no signal. The resort's Wi-Fi was suddenly down. And then Emily found her camera missing. We searched everywhere, but it was gone. I went to the front desk to complain, but the staff seemed unconcerned, brushing me off with vague reassurances. That night, I woke up to find Emily gone. Her side of the bed was empty, the sheets still warm. My heart was pounding as I called her name, but there was no answer. On the nightstand, I found a note in her handwriting. "Don't look for me. I'm safe. Trust me." The words didn't make sense. Emily would never leave like that. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside, shouting her name. The resort was eerily quiet, the only sound the waves crashing in the distance. That's when I saw the footprints. They led from our cabin into the woods. I followed them, stumbling through the trees, the flashlight beam shaking in my trembling hands. The trail ended at an old, abandoned cabin I'd never seen before. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was heavy and musty. The room was filled with strange objects, dusty photographs, trinkets, and even pieces of clothing that didn't belong to us. And then I saw them. Photographs of previous guests, some dating back decades. Smiling faces, families, couples, all of them posed near landmarks on the island. But as I flipped through them, my blood ran cold. Some of the photos included Emily and me. They weren't the photos she'd taken. They were of us, in places we hadn't been, doing things we hadn't done. I turned to leave, but Nico was standing in the doorway. "You weren't supposed to find this," he said, his voice calm, almost sad. "But you did." "What did you do to her?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "She's safe," he said, stepping closer. "The island takes care of its own." I don't know what happened next. I ran. I don't remember how I got back to the cabin, but I locked the door and barricaded it with furniture. The next morning, I flagged down a supply boat near the dock. I begged them to take me with them. They didn't ask questions. They just let me on. I left everything behind, our belongings, the resort, Emily. The police searched the island, but they didn't find her. No cabin, no Nico, nothing. Sometimes, late at night, I hear scratching at my window. And when I look, I swear I see him, standing in the shadows, smiling that too wide smile. It started as the perfect getaway. Just the 5 of us, me, Eric, Sarah, Lisa, and Greg, renting a remote cabin at the base of Grey Ridge for a weekend of skiing and relaxing. The resort was a hidden gem, tucked high in the mountains, promising untouched slopes and cozy nights by the fire. The first day was everything we'd hoped for. The snow was pristine, the air crisp, and the slopes quiet. By the time we returned to the cabin, the sun had dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in deep hues of orange and purple. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, and the smell of hot chocolate filled the air. That night, the storm rolled in. At first, it was just light flurries, the kind that makes everything outside look magical. But by midnight, the wind howled like a living thing, shaking the cabin's walls and burying everything in a relentless whiteout. By morning, it was clear we weren't going anywhere. The storm had worsened overnight, and the snow was piled high against the windows. Eric tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. The drifts outside had frozen it shut. "Looks like we're stuck," he said, forcing a grin. At first, we treated it like an adventure. We built a fire, played card games, and laughed about how we'd tell this story later. But as the day wore on, the mood shifted. The power flickered constantly, dimming the already feeble light. By late afternoon, it went out completely, plunging us into shadows broken only by the flickering firelight. The cabin grew colder, and the sense of isolation became suffocating. Then we heard it. A soft creak, like someone stepping on the porch outside. Lisa froze mid-sentence, her eyes darting toward the window. "Did you hear that?" We all nodded, our laughter replaced by an uneasy silence. Eric grabbed a flashlight and opened the curtains, peering out into the storm. The beam caught nothing but swirling snow. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every groan of the cabin, every gust of wind felt like something pressing against the thin walls. Around 3 a.m., I woke to hear a soft tapping on the window near my bed. I stayed still, my heart hammering in my chest. When I finally worked up the courage to look, I saw nothing, just frost-covered glass and the endless white beyond. By morning, Sarah was gone. Her bed was empty, the sheets rumpled, but her boots and coat were still by the door. "She wouldn't have gone outside," Greg said, pacing the small living room. Why the hell would she go outside? Lisa found her phone on the kitchen counter. The screen was cracked, and the last photo she'd taken chilled us to the core. It was of the cabin, taken from outside, and in the corner of the frame was a shadowy figure standing just beyond the tree line. We spent hours searching the cabin and shouting Sarah's name into the storm, but there was no sign of her. The snow swallowed our voices, leaving nothing but eerie silence in its wake. When we returned inside, Lisa found something else, a journal hidden in a drawer. The leather cover was cracked and old, and the pages were filled with shaky handwriting. "They weren't supposed to find me," she read aloud. "They whispered to me, showed me things. The snow doesn't let you go. It keeps you here. It keeps them here." Eric snatched it from her hands, slamming it shut. "This is just some stupid prank," he snapped. But it wasn't. That night the noises returned, scraping sounds along the walls, soft knocks at the door, and worst of all, faint whispers that seemed to come from inside the cabin itself. Lisa started crying, rocking back and forth near the fire. Greg tried to comfort her, but his own hands were trembling. "This isn't real," Eric said over and over, pacing the room. "It's just the storm messing with our heads." But then the shadows started moving. It was subtle at first, a flicker in the corner of your eye, a shape that didn't belong. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. Shadows danced along the walls, moving even when the fire was still. Eric disappeared next. One moment, he was sitting near the window, staring into the snow. The next, he was gone. His chair was overturned, and his flashlight lay on the floor, its beam pointing toward the door. Lisa was inconsolable, whispering about the figure she'd seen outside. "They're watching us," she said, her eyes wide and unfocused. "They're waiting." Greg tried to keep us calm, but the tension was too much. We started arguing, blaming each other, accusing each other of knowing more than we let on. At some point, I left the room, needing to get away from the shouting. That's when I saw my reflection. The mirror in the hallway showed me standing there, pale and wide-eyed. But something was wrong. Behind me in the reflection, a dark figure loomed, tall and thin with hollow eyes. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. By dawn, it was just me and Lisa. Greg had gone to look for Eric and never came back. Lisa was huddled in a corner, mumbling to herself about the snow and the whispers. I tried to keep the fire going, but the wood was running low. That's when the door creaked open. It wasn't the wind. It opened slowly and deliberately, and the cold rushed in like a living thing. I grabbed the poker from the fireplace, holding it in front of me like a weapon. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the blinding white of the storm. "Sarah," I called out, my voice trembling. The figure stepped inside. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't anyone. It was a shadow, tall and featureless, moving unnaturally as it crossed the room. Lisa screamed, but it didn't react. It simply stood there, watching us, as if deciding what to do next. I don't remember how I got out. I ran, leaving Lisa behind, her screams echoing in my ears as I stumbled into the storm. When I was found 2 days later, frostbitten and delirious, the search team didn't believe my story. They said the cabin was empty when they got there. No Lisa, no Greg, no signs of anyone, and they were never found again. I love taking solo road trips. There's something freeing about being alone on the open road, with no deadlines, no schedule, just miles of highway, and whatever destination catches your eye. A few years ago, I decided to spend a couple of weeks driving across the US, hopping from one small town to the next. I'd stop at roadside diners, take pictures of quirky landmarks, and spend my nights in cheap motels before heading out again the next morning. For most of the trip, everything went smoothly. The kind of adventure where the days blur together in a good way. Warm sunshine through the windshield, playlists on repeat, and the occasional wave to other travelers. It was perfect. Until it wasn't. It started with a storm. I was driving late at night, the kind of drive where you don't see another car for miles. The rain was relentless, hammering against the windshield, and the wind was howling so loud it felt like it was inside the car with me. I was exhausted and could barely see the road. When I spotted the flickering neon sign for a motel, I didn't think twice. It wasn't the kind of place you'd normally stop, a run-down building with peeling paint and a sagging roof, but I was desperate. I parked under the awning, grabbed my bag, and ran inside. The lobby was dimly lit, and the guy at the desk looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He gave me this strange smile as I approached. "Need a room?" he asked. "Yeah, just for the night," I said, shaking the rain off my jacket. He handed me an old-fashioned key with a big plastic tag. Room 6, end of the hall. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that makes your ears strain for a sound. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, and the carpet squelched slightly under my boots. Room 6 was as bad as I expected. A single bed with a sagging mattress, a flickering lamp, and a musty smell that reminded me of damp clothes left in a corner too long. But I didn't care. I locked the door, dropped my bag, and collapsed onto the bed. That's when I noticed it. The phone on the nightstand. It was one of those old rotary phones, completely out of place, like something from the 1960s. The weird part? It wasn't plugged in. The cord dangled off the side of the table, leading to nowhere. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was overtired, that I'd seen too many scary movies, and my imagination was running wild. But then it rang. I froze. The shrill sound cut through the silence like a knife. My heart was pounding as I stared at the phone, willing it to stop. It didn't. Finally, I picked it up. "Hello?" There was no response, just this low, crackling static, like an old radio trying to tune into a station. Then faintly I heard it. A voice. "Don't stay." The line went dead. I dropped the phone and backed away from the nightstand, my breathing shallow. My first instinct was to leave, but the storm outside was still raging. The rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a living thing. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to convince myself it was a prank, some kind of sick joke. But then I heard it, a soft creak, like footsteps on the carpet outside my door. I crept to the door and pressed my ear against it. Silence. I slowly turned the lock and opened the door a crack. The hallway was empty, but something felt wrong. The air was colder, and there was this faint smell, like burnt hair. That's when I saw the footprints. Wet, bare footprints leading down the hall, stopping in front of my room. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone to call the front desk. No signal. The lights flickered, and for a split second, the room was pitch black. When the light came back, something was different. The mirror above the dresser. There was writing on it, faint but unmistakable. "Get out." I didn't need any more convincing. I grabbed my bag and yanked the door open, my heart pounding like a drum. The hallway was different. The walls were warped, the wallpaper peeling away to reveal blackened wood underneath. The carpet was damp and smelled of mildew. I ran toward the lobby, but when I got there, it was empty. No desk clerk, no lights, just an open door leading into the storm outside. I bolted for my car, not bothering to check out. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the parking lot, the neon sign flickering in my rearview mirror. But here's the thing. When I looked back, the motel wasn't there, just an empty lot overgrown with weeds. I don't know what happened that night, and I don't want to know. All I know is I'll never stop at another roadside motel again. Ever. Thanks for watching. Good nightmares and stay scared.